Today we're going to balance the rotating assembly of our Ford Flathead V8 in under 15 minutes. Well, at least I'll show you the process in under 15 minutes. In reality, I spent quite a bit more time performing the labor. To be specific, this is the rotating assembly for what we believe is a 1953 255 cubic inch Mercury Flathead, which we're in the process of attempting to save after our customer let it sit for over 50 years. Be sure to check out the rest of the playlist if you need to get caught up, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. The first step in the balancing process is to weight match all of our individual components, so we'll start by weighing our freshly reconditioned connecting rods. This fixture allows us to weigh the big end of each connecting rod individually, and then the small end of each connecting rod individually. We weigh each end of the connecting rod as opposed to weighing the entire rod, because later on when we calculate our bob weights for the crankshaft, we will need to know the weight of the reciprocating components separate from the rotating components. Your rotating components consist of the big end of the connecting rod and the rod bearing insert, while your reciprocating components consist of the small end of the rod, the piston pin, retaining clips, and piston rings. It's not uncommon to find these values pretty far off with factory components, although it seems that Ford was trying to hold some pretty tight tolerances over 70 years ago, as these are really not too far off. It's a good thing too, because without a balance pad manufactured into each end of the rod, there isn't really a lot of spare material that can be removed. We're going to start on the small end of the connecting rods and grind material off of the heaviest rods to try and get within a gram across all 8. In reality, 6 grams is probably not even enough that they would ever know the difference in this application, but this is YouTube, so we're not just going to let it go. Likewise, we're going to record the weight of all of our brand new 60 thousandths oversized pistons and wrist pins. Generally, new components are going to be pretty close, and we can mix and match the heaviest wrist pins with the lightest pistons to get even closer. Again, would this small of difference ever even matter? Probably not in this application, but we're shooting for under a gram of difference, so we'll carefully remove some excess material from a non-structural area of the heaviest pistons in order to get within that 1 gram tolerance. Unlike the small ends of the connecting rods, the big ends really don't have any excess material that can be easily removed without potentially weakening the structure of the connecting rod, which we would call a no-no. That's a technical term. However, on this V8 crankshaft, there are 4 rod throws with 2 rods per throw, meaning we can actually pair up the heaviest big end rods with the lightest big end rods and end up with a pretty close average in rotating mass across the 4 rod throws. Even if the engine you're working on does have a balance pad to remove material from on the big end of the rod, it can save you some time to mix and match the heaviest and lightest components like this. Speaking of which, on the reciprocating side, we can match our heaviest pistons with our lightest small end connecting rods, and again bring our weight spread down even further, in this case well within half a gram across all 8 assemblies. At that point, we'll renumber all the components to keep them from getting mixed up.
Well, that where you're stamping that and it raises the material there, that'll probably definitely make that 6-to-1 compression motor detonate.
Yeah. But not here where they stamped 60 on it.
Right.
Finally, at this point, we can do our bob weight calculation, which uses a formula to take into account all of the components, as well as an allowance for the oil that will be in the rod journal and clinging to the assembly inside the motor. With that value calculated, we can build each of our bob weights, aiming for each half to be the same weight, and each total bob weight to be within at least half a gram of our calculated value. With the crankshaft balancing machine set up and the crankshaft set on the stanchions, the 4 bob weights are mounted to the 4 rod throws of the crank. We always mount them centered on the journal and exactly 90 degrees to each other. At that point, we can spin the crank and let the machine read the location and amount of imbalance. I know Ford claimed to hold pretty tight balance tolerances on these early V8s, but I'm still usually more surprised when it comes in close than if it comes in way far off.
Holy So 1.8 grams, 6 grams.
That's pretty dang close. Like, again, close enough that it would never be noticeable in this vehicle application, but we can get it closer. I went ahead and set up the V-blocks on the knee mill and selected the drill diameter that I had programmed into the balancing machine, since the machine gives me a depth to drill based on that diameter to remove the right amount of weight. We always start by removing material on the heavier side, and in this case, that was the rear of the crank. Rather than drilling a second hole right next to the factory balance hole where the machine told me to, I opted to drill the factory balance hole deeper. It's not in the exact right angular position, but it's close enough that it's not going to cause any issues.
$3 grams, right about where that flash is, and 1 gram at 56. A little bit further over from where we just drilled. But it did decrease. I surely shouldn't just. It's right on the mark where I shouldn't, but I'm gonna. Hopefully my wife isn't watching this.
After the second spin, the heavier side was the front, needing about 3 grams to be removed, so back to the mill we go.
.7 right here right now, and it wants 1.1 right here, but I'm probably just going to drill this hole. I already drilled it that much deeper.
Yeah.
I might drill it just a little bit more, because if anything, that'll kick the imbalance a little bit further this way. But I could add one less hole, and
Right.
I'm already
As close as you need to be. However close do you feel like getting it tonight?
well, I'm done for tonight either way.
Okay.
So, me, being what we affectionately refer to as a dippy-do, forgot that we have to thread for pipe plugs to go back in. Originally they had just a flat, like a freeze plug that was peened over.
Whenever we get one of these cranks in, we're always sure to remove the galley plugs and the rod journals, and here's why. There's no way you're getting that crank clean without taking out those plugs.
We always thread these and put in a threaded pipe plug. Obviously that's going to change our balance, so I really should have done this before. So hopefully we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot.
I really wish I had been thinking and made sure to tap and install those plugs before I started balancing the crank, but what's done is done. All we can do is cut the threads, install the plugs, and toss it back on the balancer to bring it back into balance. Again, would it really be enough to matter? Who knows?
See how much we shot ourselves in the foot yesterday by drilling before doing this. Can't believe I forgot and did that. Yep. Screwed the pooch.
In a perfect world, we can do all of our balancing by removing material from the counterweights of the crankshaft. But this isn't a perfect world. And if we had never drilled those holes in the counterweights originally, it probably would have been on the money at this point. With it just being a few grams off, we can cheat a little bit and grind a small amount of material off of the journal side of the crankshaft. You wouldn't ever do this if you had a lot of material that needed removed, but it's perfectly acceptable and common practice when you're honing in on your tolerance.
Okay. Ground here, 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 and here. .3 grams on the left side, 0.5 grams on the right side, or in other words, about 0.03 ounce inches on the left and 0.06 ounce inches on the right.
For the record, in the 90s, your OEMs were generally considering a tolerance of around 2 ounce inches acceptable for production vehicles, so I think we're probably pretty good here. With the crankshaft itself balanced, we'll add each additional component one at a time and balance them individually, starting with the flywheel.
9.1 grams.
By adding each component and balancing them individually, we can ensure that if that component ever needed replaced, they can simply replace it with a matching pre-balanced component and not be concerned with throwing off the balance of the crankshaft itself.
So I dicked around here, and depending on, this shouldn't happen, but depending on where you clock the pressure plate, it changes it. So the way I've got it clocked right now, it tells you that you need to add 5 grams right here. So I guess the bolt holes here must just be ever so slightly off of center, which isn't ideal, but that's how things are in the real world. So I put 2 extra washers on here, which accounts for 5 grams. Hopefully they don't fly off. And that gets it pretty much perfect. So we're gonna weld 2 washers right in line here.
I'm not much of a welder, so I had my dad weld 2 washers at the needed location. Turns out he's not much of a welder either. But you know what they say, a grinder in paint makes me the welder I ain't. We're gonna skip the paint though.
.6 and .6. This is the original pulley. Obviously can't use that. Plus it's cracked right here. Got a replacement. Let's spin this sucker. I think we're gonna call that good. That's the entire assembly. Pretty dang good.
And that's how you balance a flathead Ford V8 in under 15 minutes. Thanks for watching, drop a comment, like, and subscribe for more.